Hey guys, welcome back to the Well Said podcast. My name is Andre, and we are back to talk about what it means to follow Jesus in a post-Christian culture. Today's episode is one that I'm pretty excited about. We've been trying to make it happen, but this special guest has been very hard to get on the show. You run a tight schedule,
So
man.
special.
Yeah, very special. My friend and brother, Victor, is here with us, and he is here to just answer some questions about what it's like in the world of law enforcement right now, how he views his job, and how does it connect with his Christian worldview in terms of seeing what we see unfolding before us politically and how we should respond. So, Victor, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
We've had a lot of conversations. Obviously, a lot of us, probably everyone, is talking about, it's kind of getting annoying. Like every time you get together with friends, it's like, can we not talk about like Trump and Biden and whatever's going on? Like, I'm just getting sick of it. So honestly, I was trying to make this happen last couple of months, but then I'm like, let's just like not for a while. Because it felt like probably like, especially in July and August, it's like anytime we get together with friends, it's all we're talking about, the protests and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually nice now to have a little bit of distance and just be like, okay, let's just like loop around and ask some questions and,
Yeah, except it's like the calm before the storm with elections coming around the corner, and
right.
that's going to get kind of crazy.
And I tend to be, I don't know how you feel, but like, I tend to be like seesawing back and forth. Like on one hand, I'm like, oh, the apocalypse is coming. Society is melting down. On the other hand, I don't know, the optimist in me wants to say, history fluctuates. God works through situations in surprising ways. And maybe like the election's going to finish and people are just going to be like, whatever, I'm going home.
I'm sure we'll get into it, but just one thing to say about that is when you know that Jesus is king,
Yeah.
and that is your conviction, you're not so attached to all these, the latest news, the latest like who's elected to this and that. You just kind of ride the wave and live your life faithfully in your Christian life, and you realize that you can't control all these things, but also there is one who is in control.
Right.
And your response to all this is really just, okay, Lord, where do you want me in this? Like,
Right.
How do I go about this? What do I tell my kids, my family? And you're not so connected to like, oh my goodness, should I be bunkering down or this or that?
Yeah.
Like, God will lead you where you need to
Storing up food and water, buying guns.
go. Yeah.
No, see, and here's the thing. It's like there's two sides. I want to be mindful and intelligent about what's going on, but I also want to be a believer. And I was thinking about this week. Is like, I think one of the reasons we kept getting cycled into conversations, and I think still people are, politics, what's going to happen. It's because we want to be able to predict the future, and that gives us a sense of calm, like some sort of control. And it's like you never do, because everybody you talk to is just as confused and anxious.
That's why people are so sucked into like these little prophets or these little people who like had a vision. He's like a Christian and he's never had visions, so like he's just sharing.
I love everybody. All of them always say, "I'm not that kind of guy."
And I'm just like, and someone would be like, "What do you think about this?" I'm like, "What does your Bible say?" Like, just you have the Bible, and because we know that there's like some not so truth in this, but we want to believe it because we want to know whether good or bad, but we want to know what's going to happen.
Right.
So we want to base our trust in that, when really God wants us to just lean on Him, trust in Him, and not on our own like preparation. And of course there's a lot to be said to be wise and prepare and do what you need to do to protect your family.
Yeah, it's a crazy time, but our parents have lived through some interesting times. Soviet Union falling apart, like nothing new under the sun. I think we like to think that we're the only ones going through hard days. But so tell us a little bit, just background. How did you get into working in law enforcement? How did you end up in it? And
Yeah. Yeah. So the uh, quick story about it is I was never looking to work for law enforcement. I wasn't interested in it. I was actually pursuing a different career, and someone there got hired, and they're like, "Hey, you should apply. You'd like it." And I was like, "I don't even know what they do."
Yeah, because you were never really like into being a cop. Like
No.
I remember when you started applying, it was like, oh, what? Like that you never even talked
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah, it was actually kind of like, and who knows, maybe it is a stepping stone to
right?
get somewhere else. Um, but I do, at the moment right now, I do feel called in it, and I feel like I'm to be faithful and to stay there and do my job as faithfully as I can. But yeah, I just stumbled upon it, and I filled out an application. I sent it off, and then another piece of paper came. That I sent that off, and then like over a span of like I don't know 6 to 9 months, showing up to this, showing up to that. But I was just going about my normal life, and then eventually, after all the tests and stuff, they're like, "You wanna work for us?" I'm like, "Wow, okay." And yeah, so I really do see like God just kind of placed me there, and whether I wasn't like giving up my friends and family to just get into something, like
Right.
you often hear like the hope and dream,
Yeah, go out
like
of my way and
yeah,
rebuild my whole life
but
to.
yeah, I think it just kind of came upon this job, and I was like, okay, and I actually really enjoy it right now.
Do
I
you
mean,
feel
some
like
aspects.
it's like grown on you a little bit? Like at first you were like, okay, I'm doing this. And now you're like, yeah, I kind of got this. And like, I actually
Yeah.
value this job. You know how like sometimes you get into a job, I've had this where you just took it out of practicality. Like I got to provide for my family. I got to work
Yeah.
hard. But then you get into it and you're like, God put me here and I actually understand this job pretty well. And I'm actually like enjoying it.
Yeah, but I think that's just me in any situation. If I'm in like a position of some sort, I'm not gonna be like, well, I'm just here to like fill this seat.
Right.
I feel like I have to like exceed and go above and beyond, and so yeah, I definitely see it with this job where it's like, okay, well, I see what a bad cop does. I know what a good cop should do, and I think that's the kind of direction I want my agency to go, and I want to influence those around me to do a good job myself, and yeah,
Well, yeah, we'll talk about good cop, bad cop in a little bit here. But just maybe giving us, again, this is kind of fun because, so I listened to you do an episode with our friends down in Marysville. And it's fun because it's like, we're all friends. We all like know each other all of our lives, but then there's certain aspects of our lives that we don't know as much, like our careers, especially like, we deal with stuff. So especially for people who like don't know law enforcement people and like tell us about like the day in the life of work, working in law enforcement and
yeah.
what it's like, maybe some of the misconceptions people have.
Yeah, I think with law enforcement it is very misunderstood. Like even with how I misunderstood it when I was not in law enforcement. Like I get what people think. And
Especially
also
as Russian folks, because it's like,
you're a traitor
well, not even
to
that,
people.
but like Russians in general, what is it about us that we grew up like, oh shoot, there's a cop? Like, wait, why?
Well, number one, cops weren't great
Right, they were all corrupt.
people in Russia.
Yeah.
There was like, you don't know what he's gonna do. They had reason to fear. Here it's completely different, but yeah, as far as cops go, they're just regular people. There's some guys who really identify themselves. That's all of them,
Right.
and it's because that's all they have really. And just like you see someone else in another career, I don't know, firefighting, nursing, you see people with T-shirts, I'm a nurse, and blah blah blah. Like, there's definitely that, but also why it's a little more strong with cops when they identify themselves with that's like their identity is because there is no really other job that really understands them as that job, because these are people who are normal, moms and dads and brothers, but at the same time, they're people who see, like fairly regularly, people in distress, emergencies, blood and gore, dead bodies, really, gut wrenching, difficult stuff to see.
Right.
And not just to see like a movie, but you're in there with your hands dirty. And they have to be there to calm that situation down. So they have to be in control of themselves, their emotions, and that situation. And this is just like, that's, someone gets up in the morning, gets their cup of coffee, goes to their and drives to work and sits there with their, whatever computer, and they write up what they need to do. I don't know, insurance claims and quotes
Right.
and whatever. But this is like a person who's like, kisses their kids goodbye, or, to go to work, and gets their coffee and then goes. And then like, next hour you're like running through a field, running after some guy who just, running after he stabbed someone, or on scene to like someone who's dying, and you're trying to get them out of a car, and, or, or coming to a scene where a child has been seriously hurt or injured, possibly by someone else, and that's a whole, especially when
Yeah.
kids get involved, it's like it hits you hard. And then at the end of the day, you come home, hey guys, sit down for dinner,
Right.
and you go about your day. And I think people do not understand that. And there's statistics everywhere, and we see them, especially right now with cops being on the headlines all the time these days. But yeah, police see like, I don't know, like 500% more blood and gore and traumatic things than a normal civilian. So I think that's what people don't understand. It's not like a cop is just like all about, he's sitting there with his law book and he's always just studying everything up, and then he's going out to enforce it and just to slam everyone as much as he can. Like, these are just normal people, and that's why you see them in these kind of difficult situations, and they don't, they're not these heroes that rise up to the occasion, because they're just normal people. Like, yeah, and they make mistakes. And of course, I think if you've made a mistake, that is, I think we can talk about what's going on in the news, but all that. But if you take someone's life and you weren't supposed to, because of your poor judgment, I think there definitely should be repercussion. You're not excused.
Yeah.
But it's just, that's kind of like
There's a
the life
higher
of a law
accountability.
enforcement. Yeah. I think people just don't understand the kind of people that are just among them, but they see this kind of stuff. They're called to all the blood and gore that's going on
Yeah.
in the county, where you're just driving along complaining about the traffic or something.
And we probably, just hearing some of your stories, just sitting around talking with the guys or whatever, we have no idea how much violence is happening all around us every day. Most of us ordinary folks,
Yeah.
I think it's sort of comparable to like in the healthcare field, working in the ER or ICU, where you come to work and it's like, oh, I'm clocking in and I'm hearing screaming and, blood and stuff. But I think that being a cop I think there's a more intense factor because of the violence. So like, in healthcare, we deal with people's pain and like blood and guts, but not necessarily violence, which is like a whole nother element, I think.
Yeah, and people like legitimately want to kill you.
Right.
I don't know how many normal civilians have experienced that, where someone is
Right.
trying to kill them and you're fending for your life, or, it's just, trying to run from death. It's just, it takes a little bit, it changes something in you, you know?
Was it something that you were worried about going in?
No. No, I didn't think it was so busy. And even though we, here in Whatcom County is not as busy as somewhere, like
Right.
LA or Chicago or even Seattle, but it's still like there's plenty that goes on you know.
Well, in today's political world where everybody has a smartphone and everybody could be live on Instagram or Twitter or wherever, like at any moment.
Yeah.
You know, like some of the stuff with Moscow, Idaho, guys getting arrested and stuff. Like
Man.
this sleepy little farm town in Idaho, and then it's like, yep, you are now in national news. Like,
Yeah.
no one is hidden. And especially I think probably police feel this way because it's like, shoot, man, like we're all on the stage, sort of.
Well, but I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I prefer, I don't know, as many cameras as you can. Sometimes I go up to a traffic stop and someone has their phone in my face and they're like, I'm recording you. I'm like, great, I'm recording you too. Like, how's your day?
Yeah.
And people just want to like get you.
Yeah.
And it's like, just a normal guy. I want to make sure that you're not doing that and have a good day.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's crazy that I've said this to my other friends, but I've been in, you know, high speed chases and fights and this and that, and I've arrested over hundreds of people, and I've rarely have had to go into like hardcore fights and these crazy bouts.
Intense physical
And often and there's plenty of times where it could have gone that way. It's really it takes just calm down, step back, and have a conversation or something. Like, there's times when you don't have that. You have to just, you know, stop what's going on and take care of the issue whichever way you can to take control of the situation. But oftentimes, I think there's cops out there that just can't talk to people. They can't like listen. They're just like, okay, this is a criminal violation. I have to take you in custody, and they're not even saying this. They're just like, that's on their mind. They're like, oh shoot, they're pulling away, and like the whole sky comes crashing down, and they're just it just gets away from them. But it doesn't have to turn that way.
Do you think that do you think there's more cops who are not as competent in these aspects than less? Or like, what has been your impression? Like, working with people, you're like, wow, there's a lot of good people.
No, I would say general majority of police, they can talk to people. But there's definitely people there that are like young and healthy, and they haven't either developed that or they've never learned that, or in a way where...
Is there enough training on it, do you think?
No. And some of it is not even training. Like, you can tell someone, okay, you need to step back, listen to them, but some, you know, when things are from 0 to 100 and you can't bring that down,
right?
You're like, you're kind of making it get out of control by getting ramped up and trying to take control of a situation incorrectly. But no, there's definitely not enough training with what we can do to help that, to mitigate that.
I wonder if the thing is about being police, you know, like in the classic, like biblical, like, you know, the soldier, you know, bears the sword, and like when you think of like the classic maybe soldier or protector of society, you know, you're not thinking of someone who is a really good people person. You're not thinking, you're thinking of someone with muscle and capacity. Yeah. You know, you're not, because what you're saying is like, to be a good police officer, there's a whole massive moral dimension.
Yeah.
That like, you got to be a good person. And you got to be a person who's in control of their emotions, a person who can talk to people well, who can read people well, right? Like those skills above like being able to like cuff somebody, read them their rights, identify when someone is breaking the law, like a monkey can do that.
The technical stuff.
Yeah. But like the massive difference is going to be between law enforcement who have this deeper moral dimension.
Yeah. And I guess I should have said this in the very beginning, but a disclaimer is I've been only employed for almost 7 years, so 6 going on 7 soon. And so I don't feel like I'm like the authority to say what's what and how every cop should, like, I know the best ways, and I'm an excellent cop. I'm still learning, and I'm going to be always learning. And there's cops that I come on scene that I'm backing up. Some county guys, some PD guys, and you can see that they've been there for a while. Some have not, but they're just smooth and calm. They still have the control of the situation, and they're listening, and it's just like, that is good. And then you come to a scene, some guy is just like going off, and you're like, dude, chill. Like, you're obviously losing control. And yeah, there's different cops out there, and it takes more than just like that robotic handcuff and going that, especially with society putting more and more on your job.
Yeah, more and more expected constantly.
You were gonna do this, but now you're in marriage, like
marriage counseling
with DVs, and then people call you and like, my kid left the car and he won't come back in, and they're like at a rest stop, and he said he's not coming back. I'm just like, okay. And at that point, I'm actually talking to the parents more than the kid.
Yeah.
You know?
Man, that's crazy. So, like, here's the thing for me. It's interesting. Like, I trace back, even before you got into law enforcement, I feel like even being in the Russian community, and Russian people were, often. So, like, there's this mentality in the Russian community over from, Soviet communism, where basically you understand that the government is corrupt, and so in order to survive, you got to kind of like get your way and under the table kind of stuff. And so there's this like view of law enforcement and government that's like suspicious. But like, I feel like maybe it was because I watched a few like movies that like talk about law enforcement, like real experiences. I don't know how accurate they are, because movies are movies. But like, like End of Watch or like something like that, where do you feel like some of those movies are pretty accurate in terms of how they depict the challenges, the complexity? And again, that's like
it's
a broad
Hollywood.
question.
They're trying to entertain you, but
I guess that's a broad question because some movies can be super accurate and some can be very inaccurate. For me, I guess the point I'm making is that I just have a ton of respect. Like, I'm looking at even cops who are not super great at being cops. Like, you respect the office. Like, dang, man, that's a lot of on your shoulders riding. Like, you carry a gun, you're prosecuting criminals, you're chasing after them, and then you're talking to distressed moms who are crying at you about their flat tire, and like, there's just so much moral pressure. And I think to be a good cop, it takes a lot more than to be a good insurance salesman or grocery store manager or whatever it is, because there's so much more demanding to be a good cop. So there's a lot more respect to be given, I feel like.
And I guess to go to the movie thing, to say something about that, is I think like just a regular civilian, especially our keyboard warriors, think that they know exactly what we do and how we should do it.
Yeah.
And you could see this with all the rhetoric that's being, that's out there amongst the Antifa, BLM, like, and there's people that are activists in there that are willing to do like, okay, well, let's do like a scenario, like where you're a cop. And all the time they've like shot the person when he's just like advancing or whatever, just like people do not understand. And there's actually like a whole nother law aspect to it. So people would watch some of these movies and they're like, okay, so you need to be like this, this, and this. Yeah, I totally know what they should do.
Yeah.
And I watched that clip on Instagram and that's not what they did. That's totally wrong.
Yeah.
Or I watched that clip and, it was all good when it wasn't.
Yeah.
So everyone wants to be right in that sense, and everyone wants to feel
like they know it all.
Yeah, they know it. But you will see from the cops right now is that it always is like, well, we don't know. Like, we don't know. And they're always slow to say. And that's because of that. They know the job.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, there's got to be so much more to that.
Yeah.
Oh, there's so much more to that. So
and
that's
stuff can change in like a microsecond.
right. And then just people don't understand how weapons work and how they're used.
Right.
How a screwdriver can be a lot more lethal than a gun.
Right.
When you're up close to someone. Just things like that. And also, as far as like where law enforcement is, it also depends on different regions. There's a different culture of law enforcement throughout, just like Russia,
Right.
completely different than what it is here. I mean, in
Right.
Russia, you see videos of like a cop, they'll have a fist fight, and then they're like, all right, get out of here. Like,
Yeah.
and it's just, and it's like only in Russia kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But also there's stuff in other, I don't know, agencies. You've heard there's investigations into different agencies where they're all corrupt because the old guys did that. They taught the new guys to do this, and this is just a bad agency. They got to scratch that. They gotta fix that. And I feel like the farther west, well, I don't know. As much as I've seen, there's a lot more, I guess, accountability in our area as far as law enforcement goes.
Is that like Washington State or like West Coast?
Washington. See, I've never worked at those other places, but from what I understand, it's pretty similar to where cops are not like, you guys are the best, the most awesome. So you get to kind of do whatever you want. Over here, there's a lot more like, you suck because you're a cop and I'm going to get you. And cops are just kind of more on their tippy toes. And it's kind of good in one sense.
Keeps them sharper.
I think it's good for authority to remember that, especially, where we live, that the people are, you're serving the people.
Right.
You're not just there, flashing your badge, doing whatever you want.
Right.
And so sometimes people see different clips from different places, from different behaviors and different cops. It's also,
that's why it's so silly to have these national conversations of like, change this in the whole nation. Like, that's gonna, like, everything's different. Like, from
you
place to
cannot
place.
do like a blanket, like, and I mean, and it's sad because, see, like, movies of, you think you know what cops do, clips of what's going on, repeated clips on the news of how some innocent person got shot over and over and over again. Oftentimes it's not the case.
Right.
And then I would go to a traffic stop, come up to the side of the door, and the person's shaking, like unable to control themselves because they're so frightened. You're gonna just pull out your gun and shoot them in the head, and they're just like, I don't know what to do. Like, it's the first time I've ever come across.
They're
I'm
like afraid of you,
dude. Chill.
Yeah.
Like, how's your day? Like, what's going on? And that's it. And it's so
it's like
funny.
this false fear.
It's funny because we're the most informed, right? But we have not even had a conversation with a cop.
It's disproportionately informed because it's like you're informed by crazy videos.
Yeah.
But like, so, and I think maybe that, well, we can get into that in a minute here, but like the hatred, maybe a lot of that hatred is just masked fear.
Yeah, I'm sure that many of these people never even talked to a cop.
Yeah.
Never even asked them questions, asked them what they thought.
Yeah.
They're just being fed this, and we all know we live somewhat in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
If you're on social media.
Yeah.
Everything's curated to what you like and would maybe dislike and this and that. And so we're already separated this way where people are not having conversations. People are not listening to one another. People are shouting at one another through capital letters on Instagram and Twitter. It's so unhealthy for our society.
Right. So for you as a Christian, so like tell us about, like, talk about how your view of law enforcement your job has like molded and connected with your Christian convictions and your theology?
Yeah. Well, it's really helpful to not just identify with the job, meaning like this is all I am. I'm a
Right.
cop, protector. And granted, there are great officers out there who want to serve, who are being cursed and hated on, but they're like, I'm here to help you anyways.
Yeah.
And they're not Christians. They respect the title and they want to serve the people.
Right.
They say, love me, curse me, I'm still going to show up when you call 911, which is great to see that in, that's very virtuous.
Cool.
But as a Christian, knowing that my identity is in Christ, I have this freedom to be there to serve in that way. I'm here to protect the weak. I'm here to serve those who need that assistance. Because there's a lot of people out there, you know that you're wishing that your mom or dad, sister, whatever, can call 911 because someone's attacking them or they're in a hard situation and there's going to be help there.
Right.
And that's just God's design of law and order and the ability to live peaceably.
Right.
To punish the evildoer, someone needs to be there to interject for a victim, for one who's in need. But identifying myself as a Christian also gives me the freedom to not cling to this job as maybe others will. I mean, I see these cops that are arresting people for mandates and this and that that can be unconstitutional. And I can't ever see myself doing something like that, because if I'm told to do something that violates someone's constitutional rights, or is just straight up, ungodly and violates their freedoms, I have no problem to quit that day and to give my gun and badge and say, well, I can't do that. And so it has that
Because you have
freedom.
a higher principle, right?
Yeah, and that the one that you're answering to, of course, in my job, to be faithful, I have to respect my supervisor, my sergeant, and my chain of command. And I have not ever had to do something that, violates someone's freedom to where it's not godly and violates their constitutional rights. Although I would say I lean a lot more libertarian. For some people who don't know what that is, it's not liberal. It's
Right. Meaning less laws,
Yeah.
a little bit, and
more freedom for people to decide and choose, and you're just there to keep the peace, in a sense.
yeah, that's the challenge of the law. It's like the Bible. It's interesting because, like, when Paul says in Romans, like, respect, like Romans 13, I went back and read Romans 13 this past month. I was prepping for a sermon on, Caesar, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. And it's just like, it's pretty interesting because it's actually very specific. Like Paul doesn't just say, oh, like, respect the authorities. Like, he goes on and on about, like, he bears the sword, he is a servant of the Lord, and all this stuff. And it's like, he's talking about pagan soldiers, like Roman soldiers, like, maybe Jewish soldiers who don't respect Jesus. Like, well, he's talking to Romans, so obviously he's, but like, he's not talking about godly Christian soldiers.
Yeah.
He's just talking about men who bear arms to uphold justice and law and order in society. And those men were not perfect. And yet, like, God says, like, obey, like, respect the office,
Yeah. See, there's a lot of this, like, gung-ho, like, no way, no how, you're not going to take my freedom away. But people don't really know the levels and, like, at what point do you bear arms and fight the government? Like,
Right.
I have it in my head, like, I know when to fight tyranny. But
Do you think that there's actually, like, a realistic threat of it?
I think so. I think if it comes to, like, Second Amendment rights, because that is the biggest step to take away people's freedom. people's ability to protect themselves and not be dependent on just the government.
Right.
I don't think that we are created to be dependent on a government, the state to protect us, to feed us. That's not
Pay our bills.
Yeah, and I mean that's a whole big conversation that we go into, and there's a lot there. But because it's not, there needs to be that window open for people to be able to do what they need to do to protect themselves and their family, to provide for their family, and not rely on the government, because that is in a sense your God.
Right.
When you start depending on all of it and you're willing to give up your whole freedom and your freedom to do this, that, and that, you are submitting it to the government, to the state as your God.
Yeah. Well, and like that's an important, huge point, because the reason why people today are so amped up and anxious about politics is because politics has become God. You know, like what was it? Francis Schaeffer said, if there is no absolutes by which to govern society, society becomes absolute. And like in our world, of course, politics is literally it's the religion of the secular world. It's their religion. They feel religiously about it. They defend it religiously. And so we live in a world where the state is worshipped, because the state is the only vehicle for our progress, the sanctification.
Yeah, or any kind of change, heart change, moral change.
Everything has to be.
Everything is religion. But you see, that's expected, right, from people who do not worship God. But you see this seeping into
The churches,
into Christians, the way they talk, the way they get riled up, and then you ask them what they think about a certain verse or Bible passage, and they have no thoughts or ideas, or like they're not so invested in it. You know, when you ask them like life of the church questions and this and that, they have really nothing to say about it. But if you talk politics, they get all fired up, and it's like, and that just shows what's inside. And I think that's when people get so discouraged and afraid, because when government and people is God, you know, is religion, you can't have any kind of control. When you're under God's control, you have peace in that. You know, you're not going to have control either way.
Yeah.
But you can have peace in knowing that a good God is over all things.
Well, and it also guides you, like you were saying. There is like a biblical balance to how you see the purpose of law enforcement. Like, you know, the basic Genesis, you know, narrative shows us that God gives law enforcement, God gives capital punishment, you know, and government for the protection of justice among people and, you know, safety, and protect the weak and the helpless. You know, so there's limits, there's rational limits that you as a Christian law enforcement officer can like anchor yourself to. Has that, do you feel like that gives you a slightly different approach or vibe from other like people you work with? Or, I mean, obviously there are good police officers who are not believers. But have you felt like a difference, or is that just more of a deeper, like you understand more deeply why you do what you do, you know?
Well, I don't know, like those, you know, the deep inside what's going on in people's head, and they probably can't see it, but can't see it in me, right? But I think where you can see it is you're doing the same job, and you could be doing almost the same exact things, but you can be doing it in a completely different way, because you answer to God. And there's people that I've arrested that say, dude, I've never experienced this kind of, you know, treatment, and it's been like very eye-opening. Thank you so much for being so respectful and this and that. And these people are arrested, handcuffed in my back seat. And I, you know, just tell them, dude, you're made in the image of God. I have no right to disrespect you. You made a mistake. You're gonna, you're gonna answer for that. You're still held responsible. But that doesn't mean I get to treat you like trash because I think I'm more superior than you because I have authority or I have a badge to wave around. I'm like, I'm just like you, man. And people, and it comes through by the way you talk to them. And people see this and they, yeah, and I think
It makes them feel
the
more
biggest
human.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest difference.
You call out the human in them.
Yeah, and you'd have people who are complete like just got out of prison, joyriding, raising all kind of havoc. At one point, you have them at gunpoint, and you're trying to get them in custody, and then finally on the way to jail, and still at the end of it, they'd be like, "Hey, man, I'm so sorry about that. You've been so good, and yeah, it's the way you treat these people, and perhaps they've been treated like some kind of
trash, and they act like trash.
Yeah, lesser person.
Yeah.
And that's how they act. And of course, there's people who make their decisions, and they are responsible for those. And it's not to take away from that. It's just talking about like how I treat them because of my worldview, knowing that it is God who is over man.
Right.
Not man is over man.
There's something extra powerful about somebody who has power and yet clearly uses it in a way that is serving the other, even when that person is not worthy of it. Especially in your job, I'm sure that's the case. People who hate you, you're still like respectful.
Yeah, it comes to the authority because you mentioned Romans 13, where it says, submit to your governing authorities, and it says because all authority has come from God. Like He's established that authority.
Right.
So when we understand that we are not, and it goes into even like you as a husband, or in any
leader,
any position of authority, or any leader should understand that the authority that you have, you didn't just like were born with it, or you didn't just wake up one morning and you're filled with this superpower authority. Authority is been delegated to you, and you are to serve with it. You don't wield it around as you wish. It doesn't belong to you. You're to be a steward of it.
Right.
And that humbles you to remember that this is not yours. Don't use it to boast your own way around. And also you want to be as faithful as you can in that.
Right.
How does God want you to wield that authority? It's to protect the victim, to help those in need, and to punish the evildoer. Like it straight up says that.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I get like you've mentioned like, oh, maybe it's a stepping stone, blah blah, but also like it's just like I'm always encouraged like hearing when we're hanging out, like, dang, that's so cool that we have cops like this. Like I'm just more cops like this, that makes our society better, and it really makes a difference, I think, especially on the lowest, people in their lowest state. You can speak truth or embody that truth, and that'll be stuck, I think, with those guys, so.
Yeah, it goes, you can oftentimes hear these people, and they'll be like, man, I've only talked to one other good cop, or something. Like they remember. And these are people who are criminals who are like, always running into cops.
Yeah.
But they know who are the ones who took the time to talk.
Yeah.
And they know there's good ones out there.
So another thing I wanted to ask you about, so you're on this special team that you've been sent down to the Seattle rioting. How many times have you been down?
Oh, I don't know.
Lost count? Really?
Yeah.
So you feel like, you've been down there a lot. I guess I felt like it was like 4 times or something you've been down.
No, several weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like total, I guess. There's some days where it calms down. Some days are like, nope, we got to go.
So are you there on like the front line with riot gear?
Yeah.
Wow. So like
oftentimes
the whole helmet.
Yeah, and we try to
shield.
switch off. Sometimes a lot of screaming in your face, and
Gets a little old.
it gets very tiring.
Dang.
and they're there with as much hate as you can imagine. I feel like they don't even know what's going on. Like they have no capacity for conversation or anything. It's just like full on hate. They don't want to talk. They don't want. It's crazy. And also they have just like a swarms of these lawyers who are just standing around with lawyer hats, writing everything down in
Wow.
case we do something wrong. They could have their
Dang.
payout. So it's
And these
basically
lawyers are
like
like
how far can you push it, and we have all everything we need to get the cop. It just
crazy.
yeah, and is definitely a political thing. It's a political movement because these big crowds that are happening, they can be ended.
Right.
They can be stopped. Like we have the capability, we have the manpower,
Techniques.
we have the techniques, we have the tools, but they take away this, they take away that, and then when they see something's working well, they want to pull that back. And it's like just enough to raise havoc. At least that's what it looks like on the ground.
Interesting.
It's
So it's not
it's kind
just
of it's just discouraging.
yeah, so it's not just like, thousands of people just showing up and like people like the authorities are just totally like flustered and like have no idea what to do. Like there's clear pathways of
Yeah.
controlling
Yeah, and it starts
violence
from
in the streets,
yeah.
but it's not being used, right?
Starts from ground up. So as far as like tactics, there's ways to disperse people. There's ways to catch them. We arrest some of the people that raise. I mean, it's a stupid thing now to say like the most damage. A lot of them are causing damage that you would clearly get arrested on a normal
Right.
road or whatever town. But those who are causing the most crazy damage, let's say throwing rocks or whatever, fireworks. We've had guns, fired in our direction, and just all these kinds of things. We'll arrest these people, and then the very next night we see them in the crowd again,
Yeah.
and that's like
That's a policy
that's the
thing.
biggest thing.
Yeah.
That's so, like I said, it starts from the ground up to politics. I mean, I specifically go to Seattle, and it's very liberal down
Very
there.
progressive.
Yeah, they're so progressive.
Progressive.
And then like during their whole Chop Chaz thing, that worked out really great for them. They got to live in their utopia.
I know.
It was
Some people got shot.
Oh my goodness. It was a mess. They're like, okay, if there's gonna be any more people shot, it's like, of course people are getting shot at still. Like, okay, we can't have that because it looks bad on us, the progressives, because we let these progressive ideas
Right.
flesh out.
Yeah. We actually let them realize the results that they were going to bring either way. So when you were there on the front lines, sort of like, did you ever like, I mean, obviously, maybe this is an obvious question, but was there constant concern of like your actual safety, or did you feel pretty secure with your guys' like tactics and whatever, like, or is it pretty tense? Like, are you pretty like tense, like adrenaline wise, like on your watch, like watching out?
Yeah, you're pretty on focused. It gets kind of hairy. If you're like farther back, it's you're more responding to things
On the front.
going down. But when you're up on the front line, yeah, there's people out there that just hate you vehemently, like out of like they've never met you, and they're screaming in your face that they want you to die and your family to die, and they're like mocking all the cops that were just killed recently, and
It's crazy.
and it's just
How can we be surprised? But still, it's like, it's pretty amazing. Like, it's not like it only happens on the left. It happens on both extreme sides, extreme left and extreme right. This like I hate your guts and I want you to die right now.
yeah.
Like to be able to show up to an event and to scream that at strangers all day long.
Yeah.
Like that's
And there's just tons of them pointing, and you're like, you guys are murderers and you kill
right.
black people, and all of us are victims. And it's like, okay, I do my job as faithfully as I can, and I see all of these people in the image of God, how He created us, but there's like no, they don't see like the human behind there,
Right.
and I don't even know how you get to that.
Well, if you can't have a theology of human dignity, there's no reason to believe that about
Right.
people, right? That's what we're seeing in society right now. So like in terms of like proportion wise, was it mostly violent, mostly peaceful with some really violent times, like mostly just craziness all the time? Or was it like kind of a mix?
It's funny that we start using these kind of descriptors now, like mostly peaceful or mostly violent. Like it
Like
was
the CNN headline with mostly peaceful protests with
right.
like
It's
burning
like
buildings in the
okay, so I
background.
guess the people who aren't with the lighter lighting something, they're peaceful, although they're screaming and chanting and trying to get you from coming there, and they're throwing rocks and this and that. Um,
No,
and
but I
then
guess
this
yeah, I'm still like I getting at that antagonism. Like you felt that hatred from most of the people, rather than what people want to say like, oh, we're here for peaceful protesting. We're not like cursing cops. We're not yelling at them. We're just we're trying to raise awareness on this issue or
Yeah.
whatever.
No, there's definitely a group of people that are out there that are trying to do a peaceful protest.
But they're being totally, I feel like, drowned out.
They're being drowned out, and I feel like there's way more of the people who are just going nuts
Yeah.
and take over the gathering. And then at that point, they just have a big mob now that they can hide in and use. But I mean, does mostly peaceful mean you could block intersections or the freeway?
No. Yeah.
Because there's ambulances that are trying to get to the hospital or this or that. It's like that's not
No,
peaceful.
that's not peaceful.
I think peaceful is, you're doing.
You're abiding by the laws.
Yeah,
First of all.
you're well. I think there's room. There's some room there, right? If something
Civil
is so
disobedience.
terrible, there's some civil disobedience. But this is way past that. Like, look at the MLK protests. Those were peaceful.
Very different.
Those were done with reason. They wanted to have a discussion.
Yeah.
These, most of what's going on in Seattle, Chicago, Portland, those are not peaceful protests.
There's no conversation.
And they don't want to have a conversation. They want like a full-on takeover. I mean, that's what they preach. What BLM and Antifa said. Like, that's full-on what they preach is we're trained Marxist, right? To overthrow, to destabilize the government, and to do our own thing.
Crazy. So in terms of in the wake of it, like coming back through it and being doing your job back in town and last month or so, like what's the vibe been for you? How has it changed? What's, your duty as a police officer has been different.
No, I
Felt
mean,
different?
yeah, I mean, obviously it's there's times when you're just in that negative like soup for so long. It's a big downer, right?
Yeah.
Like all you hear is hatred and the news is all about how terrible the cops are. And then a lot of cops are trying to do their job right, but it doesn't matter because you're a cop, you're wrong, and they're not protected. So there's some fear in that, because the mob is ruling,
Right.
which is not justice.
Right.
And a lot of these people who are marching for these victims, some of them are, like what happened to George Floyd, that should not have happened. Nobody agrees with that. No cop thinks that was
Right.
okay. But a lot of these names that they shout out, they have not obviously read any of the
Reports.
They have not been following it. It's almost like they're puppets and they're being told, okay, go riot.
Yeah.
And it's
And a
it's
lot
sad
of the
because
families
people
of the
aren't thinking.
victims are like horrified by the rioting. They're like denouncing it.
Yeah.
They're like, this is stop, you know?
Yeah.
So like definitely there's a conversation to be had about race. There's a conversation to be had about police brutality, maybe even reform in certain areas, right?
Yeah.
But like this acid that surrounds us in society it's drowning out all possibility of good change, you know?
Yeah. And cops, as far as, I mean, we full on tell each other, like we were having just break time, and it's like, hey, if I'm doing something that you think I shouldn't be doing, please step in, you know? Like,
Yeah.
we have these kind of conversations. We're not like, oh, screw them, they don't know what they're talking about, we do everything perfect. No, we're people who make mistakes, and we should be accountable to the mistakes we make. But yeah.
Wrapping up here, so like just as Christians, like I hate you know, that's what I don't like talking too much about politics these days, because it just becomes this acidic negative environment like we were saying earlier. What would you say, just from like your perspective as a Christian, as a leader in the church, and as a law enforcement officer, like just some takeaways on like things that we should be doing, things that we should be thinking in this time? Like what should be our response as Christians in some bullet points or some basic ideas?
Yeah, I would say that the most important thing we can do is to listen to one another, to talk and to have conversations, to not be so like overwhelmed when you hear someone else's opinion that you don't agree with. And because that is the most toxic thing, when we can't have conversation, when we can't disagree on something and talk it out. I try to practice that in my life. I listen to people who I don't necessarily agree with, because I want to hear what are they talking about? Like, what is troubling to them,
Right.
and what can I learn about that? It's not to think that if there's a side and I'm staying on that side, and whatever happens, I'm not changing or moving. There's a lot of police stuff, like, cops doing stuff that is totally unconstitutional. Like, just because they're cops doesn't mean I'm supporting them.
Right.
I'm gonna speak against evil wherever it is. But I think as Christians, we need to learn, wherever we are, is to just have conversation, to listen to others, and to have the humility to be like open-minded.
Right. To not be afraid to face truth,
Yeah.
even if that truth means correcting some of your misconceptions, right?
Yeah, and above it all, to know that Jesus is King. I mean, we talked about the riots and stuff like that, and some people get just really discouraged and riled up when they hear about this. I'm like, I can't believe they did this and this and that. But at the end of it all, Jesus is King. He is Lord, and we're to submit to Him. And the number one thing that I always tell my friends, my group, my family is, you do what you need to do as a Christian, which is live your life, love your family, serve those around you, your neighbors. We know like the practical, normal day-to-day life we need to do. And in turn, God will send people and relationships where we can have those conversations, those tough conversations. And when we are focused on glorifying Him and not trying to protect or defend like all Republicans at no cost, it's like that's not the alliance. That's not who you should be fighting for.
You get sucked into this binary.
Yeah.
It's like, basically, if I so much as critique anything that conservative people have done, oh, what are you a liberal now? Are you voting Democrat? Are you for killing babies in the womb? Like, boom, like wait, how did that escalated quickly? Like, you can be for conservative values, and one of those values is all people are corruptible. Conservatives believe that.
Yeah.
And so none of us are above critique.
Yeah.
So I think as Christians, it's so important for us to be very careful not to have our allegiances be firmly tied to this political movement or that political movement, right?
Yeah, it's not bad to be patriotic,
Right.
and to love your country, to serve your country. But that also means to love your neighbor. And to love your neighbor means you have the humility and love to listen to your neighbor.
Right.
If your neighbor is having a very difficult time because they're of some different race and stuff like that, and you're not seeing that, maybe you're not loving your neighbor. You're not listening to him because you think it's a whole bunch of, political whatever. But having the time to build those relationships and listen to one another is going to really be a blessing to our community and to this toxic time that we live in.
Well, and it's liberating to discover that you're not always right, because then you can be skeptical of some of your fears. You know, you can be like, oh, they're so evil, they're coming to get my kids. It's like, in some there are very evil people, but also, there's a way for me to see people and see that they have arguments that I haven't thought about. And even through that, like, again, I was just thinking about it like, dang, what is it going to mean for Christians to be a political witness, in an age when everybody's so divided that Christians are only on this side and not on that side? And then but who's going to evangelize to those guys? Like, you have to hold to your conservative values. You have to uphold, this country, love it, protect the law, respect law enforcement. And yet, don't forget, as a Christian, you're called to make disciples of all nations. Yeah. Which means going across the street and talking to your,
Yeah, and we can go on forever, honestly, and because I think there's plenty of questions like, well, what about the bad laws, and what about, it could keep going on and on. But I think in general, if we just wrapping it up, is to love your neighbor, to listen to your neighbor, have that conversation. Just because someone has a Biden sign outside their yard, it doesn't mean that they're the worst human in the world.
Or vice versa.
They probably never met a normal person who voted for Trump because they're in their bubble. Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure, man. Well, hey, thanks so much for making the time today. I think it's been a super helpful conversation. Thank you guys for listening. If you want to let us know what you thought, send us a message on Instagram, Facebook. This episode is also a video. It'll be on YouTube. So we have a couple of episodes that we've done video versions as well. Check out well-said.org. That's kind of like the home base of the podcast, and it's a blog where I post articles weekly. And let us know what you thought. Leave a review on iTunes if you have a moment, because that helps other people find the show. And thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you guys again soon.